Assalamu alaikum and good day. I am Jehan Bashir and our group is assigned with the first special report that is to discuss about how to teach business English. Now for my part, I am going to discuss the first 3 chapters of the topic. So the content of my report will be the chapter 1, what is special about English, chapter 2, assessing needs and preferences, and lastly the chapter 3, designing a course. Now let us start with the first chapter. The Business English Learner. Every day, millions of people all over the world use English in their business activities. Business is about buying and selling, or more broadly, exchanging and exploiting resources and capabilities. It uses the language of commerce, finance, industry, of providing goods and services. It is about cooperation, negotiation, and conflict. So business is about persuading and understanding, power and control, explaining and finding solutions to problems. So in short, business English is communication with other people within a specific context. Now despite this wide variety, it is possible to group learners together in generally accepted categories. First, according to experience, pre-experienced learners have little or no experience of the business world. Typically, they are learning business English because they intend to follow a business career. So they may be university students, for example, or even secondary school students. Now secondly, job experienced learners know a lot about their business and their own jobs, and often have very precise notions about why they need business English. In contrast to pre-experienced learners, job experienced learners do not need or expect the teacher to help them understand the world of business. And lastly, the general business experience falls somewhere between the two. It comprises learners who may already have a certain amount of work experience but who are learning English in order to move into a new job or for a specific purpose. Now, according to level in their organization's hierarchy, very often learners at different levels in a company have different approaches to business English learning. Senior managers, for example, may wish to focus on special skills like presenting or negotiating, or may wish to have one-on-one lessons because of their status within an organization, whereas more junior staff may not have such precise needs or may not be able to influence how their training is managed. So, a company might arrange separate classes for senior managers and other sessions for clerical staff. Thirdly, according to national culture, different national cultures have different traditions and values regarding training and education. Sometimes, learners need to be split into different groups in order to cope with this. For example, a private language school in, let us say, UK, US, or New Zealand might elect to teach separately its Asian and Hispanic learners whose different styles of communication might otherwise interfere with the learning process. Now next, according to need. Some learners have very specific needs which they want the teacher to help with. Other learners have a general aim to improve their English because it seems the right thing to do and they need a less focused course. A third category might be learners with particular roles or functions, such as secretaries, accountants, or technicians. So they may work in different firms but share job characteristics they can all identify with. Next, we have according to language level. Sometimes learners are grouped together because they have roughly the same language proficiency. So, learners might be called beginners or advanced or level 3 depending on how well they can pass a test or fit in with a set of predetermined criteria. Secondly, we have the business English teaching contexts. So, in the aspect of the education institute, young adults are typically taught in an institutional education environment such as a school, university, or apprenticeship scheme. If they are in a tertiary education environment, it could be that the teaching will require a lot of work with written texts and perhaps the preparation of oral or written assignments so that grades can be given. Learners in such institutes normally start with certain expectations or feelings about the class. They may expect that the teacher to be an expert on the business world as well as a language expert. They may feel that learning English is not as high a priority as other subjects, and the classes, often relatively large, may contain learners with widely disparate language levels and skills, because such groups usually do not know exactly how they will be using their English in future, it can be difficult to focus on specific target needs. Now, in the aspect of private language schools exist in more major cities of the world. Sometimes they are part of franchises or chains, and sometimes they are small organizations run by one or two people. So the teaching may take place in the school's own premises, or the teacher may be expected to travel to the customer's location. So the customers may be anything from private individuals trying to improve their English in order to apply for a job, right up to large corporations with employees all over the world. Teachers planning to work in language schools are well advised to find out about pay and conditions before they sign a contract. Now, in-company teaching involves working at the client's premises and can vary from a couple of hours a week to a full-time job. It offers a very different experience from working in an educational establishment for at least two reasons. That is, the learners are not only operating in their workplace already, but they will often have a much better idea of why they need English. Teachers who work full-time in a company will get to know the company's needs very well. They will normally be given their own training room and will also have access to resources such as the company intranet. Sometimes the trainer will be invited to attend meetings, do work, or help out with written documents. In-company trainers are normally required to do many other tasks besides teach. Administration is particularly important as there is often no one else to do it for them. Rooms need to be booked, stationery ordered, fire practices need to be attended, and so on. One of the tasks of the in-company teachers is to walk about and meet people in all parts of the organization. Now we have here the one-to-one. One-to-one is quite a common arrangement in business English teaching. It can involve preparing a learner for a specific project, coaching over a longer period, checking or helping with presentations, correspondence, reports, and so on. Normally, a teacher manages a group of people, whereas in a one-to-one situation, not only is the teacher able to focus entirely on the learner's needs, but the learner also becomes the main resource. The teacher's task is to formulate the learner's language, working towards an improved version, either orally or in written form. It is not merely about focusing on grammatical or lexical errors, although this should be addressed. So one-to-one learning is already intensive enough, and such key needs may add to stressful situations. Teachers are well advised to remember the value of silence and the need to vary the pace and intensity of activities. In some cases, the teacher and learner strike up a personal relationship or build a special rapport with each other. A one-to-one situation is far less contrived than a classroom situation, and it can feel much more like real communication. So we have here the business English teacher. In most other fields of teaching, the teacher knows more about the subject than the learner. But in business English, the relationship can be more symbiotic. That is, the teacher knows about language and communication, but the learner often knows more about the job and its content. So we have here the following functions of a business English teacher. First, the teacher as a trainer. A teacher is traditionally seen as someone whose task is to educate someone so that they can have more chance at succeeding in life. A trainer, on the other hand, is someone who is required to change a person's behavior or ability so that they can do a specific job. Training is job-oriented, while teaching is person-oriented. Thus, whereas a language teacher is helping a student to learn a language for a variety of purposes, a trainer is training them to behave both linguistically and pragmatically in a certain way. Secondly, the teacher as a coach. A coach is someone who can help the learner take advantage of the learning opportunities in their own working environment. It involves helping the learner to better understand his or her own strengths and weaknesses and plan accordingly. This is related to the concept of learner autonomy, where the learner takes full responsibility for his or her learning. Thirdly, we have the teacher as a consultant. A consultant is an expert who is brought in because his or her skills or know-how are not available in the organization. In business English, this expertise can cover a wide area. It may include the ability to analyze communication and communication needs. It may require the teacher to recommend a training supplier, or it may involve the teacher negotiating with a number of hotels to choose the best location for a course, for example. Now we have here the language in context. Some groups of people use language in other ways too, ways that are not as familiar to outsiders. So they use specialist words to make communication within the group easier and more efficient. Every profession does this. In fact, one defining feature of a profession is that it has its own linguistic identity. So people use specific language to communicate in specific contexts. Business communities are no different. For example, accountants use the language of accounting to talk about accounting matters, or sales engineers use specific language to discuss their product specifications with their customers. These are both business communities, but they probably wouldn't understand each other's specialist vocabulary. So for example, in accounting, they talk like, "Can we talk about gearing after lunch? I am hungry." Or in the power industry, "We've had some SF6 leakage." So, business English is an umbrella term for a mixture of general everyday English, general business English, and ESP. It is not limited to words or phrases that only appear in some special business world. Yet, there are some other things which make business English distinctive. Firstly, business people do a variety of things with language. They socialize, predict, analyze, negotiate, buy, write, persuade, compromise, telephone, compete, market, sell, produce, and etc. These are done in a specific business context and for business aims. But skill in using business English is not limited to the words and language used. Business English users need to know the words, but they also need the skills in order to do their job. Secondly, the English used in international business is not necessarily the same English that native speakers use. It is a lingua franca. It may even be considered a new type of English which has developed and is developing to meet the needs of its users. People whose first language is English do not necessarily speak this language. The important thing to remember is that the language the learners need may share only certain characteristics with the teacher's own version of English. Thirdly, although we know a lot about how people interact and the sorts of things they say to each other, there are many areas of business English or ESP where there is not much reliable information on what people actually say. A good example of this relative lack of information is in the matter of small talk, which often seems to have a relationship building function rather than direct business content. So small talk is the simple throwaway line we might offer when we meet someone in the corridor or anywhere along our way. Such conventional polite exchanges might be vitally important to the business English learner who needs to build good business relationships. Next, we have teaching business communication. Linguistic competence is shown in the use of the basic elements that go together to form a language, such as vocabulary, grammar, phonology, and so on. The Longman grammar of spoken and written English divides words into three types. First, the lexical words, which refers to the carriers of meaning such as nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Second, we have the function words, which deals with the relationships between lexical words or indicate how they are to be interpreted. Examples are determiners, pronouns, modals, prepositions, and coordinators. And the third type are inserts, for example, the yeah, well, and ouch. So, spoken grammar is normally used in real-time interaction. It has different word order rules, uses contractions such as can't, won't, or hesitations, repetition, or ellipses, and is often vernacular. It is not only what is said, but how it is said that is of interest to business English learners. Phonology is about how we use our voices to make the sounds of utterances. We use stress, rhythm, and intonation, sometimes called prosody, to convey meaning. Trunking involves grouping words together with a pause or a change in pitch or a lengthening of a syllable to signal the end of the chunk. So secondly, we have the discourse competence. Linguistic competence deals with elements of language at a basic level and tends to focus on language out of context. Discourse competence, on the other hand, deals with the language in use, although it is important to note that the word discourse can be used in a variety of ways by language professionals. For the purpose of this book, however, Discourse is used to describe how people interact with each other within context. One strategy involves the use of register, which refers to the degree of formality or the degree of specificity, especially of topic vocabulary. Now next we have the intercultural competence. This includes the ability to deal with and be sensitive to differences in how other cultures do things. Culture has to do with attitudes, behavior, beliefs, and values. It is influenced by a multitude of factors including environment, gender, family, age, and ethics. It manifests itself in interaction between people and is continually changing. It is learned and not inherited through genes. So there are different types of cultures. First, the natural culture takes as its reference point the concept of the politically bounded nation-state. This is not the same as ethnicity, which is used to refer to groups having the same language, history, religion, or race. A nation may be composed of different ethnic groups, and ethnic groups do not always observe national borders. Communicative language teaching. This aims to develop learners' ability to use language to communicate. Languages are learned while using them with an emphasis on real-life situations. In the business English classroom, this is often done via tasks, which are activities where the focus is primarily on using language to do something. It is the outcome of the task which is important, just as in the business world, the language is a means to an end, not an end itself. It is often argued that there are two basic forms of CLT, or communicative language teaching, a weak and a strong one. So both forms are used in business English classrooms. The weak form of CLT focuses on what is to be learned, and the strong form of CLT focuses on how learning takes place. In other words, it argues that language is learned via the negotiation of meaning in real communication. So moving on to the second chapter, we have the assessing needs and preferences. Before we can start teaching a course, there is a certain amount of information which we have to gather in the form of a needs analysis. A needs analysis helps the teacher to understand the difference between where the learners are in terms of communicative competence and where they need to be to meet their business aims. Sometimes this needs analysis is minimal and simply consists of a series of brief questions which give the teacher a rough idea of the needs of the group. But at other times, a needs analysis can be a more substantial proposition designed to look at an organization and work out its strengths and weaknesses in terms of communication in English. So the basic aim of a needs analysis is to collect and examine critically information about the current situation, in other words, where the learners are before teaching begins, and the target situation, which is where they would like to be at the end of the teaching. It does not produce a sharply defined list of things to do in the classroom. What a needs analysis does is offer a chance to focus on those areas which are more relevant to the learner or the company. It provides a series of snapshots, none of which gives a complete truth, but all of which contribute to understanding. So the key point is the more snapshots we take, the better our understanding is. Secondly, we have communication needs. One of the aims of a communication needs analysis will be to find out as much as possible about the different areas and styles of discourse that learners might engage in. This will not only give a better idea about the target situation, but will also address the teacher's own need to understand what the learners actually do with the language. So the first part of analyzing communication needs is to find out as much as possible about what the learners on the course will need to do in English. The other main part of a communication needs analysis is finding out how good the learner's language use is and what is their current communicative competence. Now thirdly, we have the pedagogic needs. Pedagogic needs refer to those needs which exist as a result of the teaching context. So there are three main aspects to consider. Those are the teacher's needs, the learner's or learner needs, and the means to do the course. First, we have the teacher's needs. An important part of a needs analysis then is for the teacher to consider the questions like, how do I think people learn best? What are my strengths and weaknesses? What experience do I have? What do I know about my own learning style? And lastly, how much of what happens in the classroom is a result of my personality? Secondly, we have the learning needs and styles. Teachers have long recognized that learning success depends on a number of factors, one of which is the learning style of the learner. There are a number of different ways to look at learning styles. And one broad categorization is based on the findings of research into brain function. That is, the right and the left sides of the brain play different roles in how we process information. So this perspective is characterized by the NLP or the neuro-linguistic programming, which refers to the collection of techniques, models, and theories based on how the mind works and how people behave and communicate. Neuro refers to how we perceive the world through our nervous system and draws attention to how we use our senses. Linguistic emphasizes how language allows us to perceive the world around us and how we influence that world. And lastly, programming refers to the idea that we can train ourselves to behave in certain ways and become more precise in our use of language to help us achieve our aims. So Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory provides another way to compare learners' learning needs. It suggests that there are 8 different types of intelligence, but that each one of us possess each intelligence to a greater or lesser degree. These are the bodily kinesthetic, intrapersonal, interpersonal, verbal linguistic, logical mathematical, musical, visual spatial, and naturalist. So means analysis is a description of the training environment. That is, what is available in terms of equipment, facilities, and time, and perhaps more importantly, what is not. So one significant aspect is what materials are available. So means analysis normally produces lists which have an important bearing on the cost of the course. So here is a list of points that should be thought about during the means analysis. First, what facilities are available, what equipment is available, how much time is available to design the course and prepare materials, how much time is available for training, what is the availability of suitable materials, and what time of the day will learners be available. And lastly, we have the business needs. Understanding business needs is of critical importance. This will all have certain perspectives on what the learners will need to cover on a course. It is important to make it clear to sponsors that their needs are recognized and will be addressed while remaining realistic about what is promised. And it is equally important to remember that businesses are interested in getting something worthwhile for their money. One way to understand business needs better is to learn as much as possible about the company. This means doing some research. Ideally, this is done before starting to meet people. Understanding the business situation where the learner will be using the language is also important. Now finally, the chapter 3 involves designing a course. Designing a business English course is a matter of making a series of decisions based on information gathered during a needs analysis. A useful place to start is to decide on the course aims and objectives. Now, aims are general statements about why the course is happening. On the other hand, objectives are more specific and break up the aims into smaller elements of learning so that the outcomes are better understood and are couched in more precise terms. So, a useful acronym to use when writing objectives is SMART. Objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Now, there are different ways to express objectives depending on the context. Firstly, most business English courses use performance or behavioral objectives, which typically describe what the learner is expected to do, under what conditions, and to what level or standard. Such objectives use words like will learn, will be able to, and can. Right? For example, staff will learn how to make, confirm, and change appointments with customers by email. Secondly, sometimes a course might use teaching or training objectives, which, unlike performance objectives, these do not normally specify what the learner will be able to do at the end of the course. Instead, they are designed to give the teacher useful guidelines, and they may use technical words which learners may not be familiar with. For instance, the course is designed to increase participants' awareness of appropriacy and register in email communication. It is also important to remember that the business objective may be quite different. The outcome of the course can be seen not only in terms of what has been learned, but also in terms of changes in the workplace or in business results resulting from the training having taken place. Now, secondly, we have here the syllabus components. Once we know what we want the course to achieve, we can move on to thinking about the syllabus. Syllabus is essentially a list of what is to be covered during the course and in what order. One key principle is that the syllabus should focus on language needed to perform a particular business task and not merely to talk about it. So the syllabus provides a structure that puts the selected language into orderly, manageable chunks with both the content and the order matched to the learners and their situation. It also provides a basis for decisions about materials. So, determining the order of the syllabus can be done in different ways. A common way is to put the simpler things first. For example, standard phrases for starting a telephone conversation are taught and practiced before moving on to more complicated role plays involving their use in a real phone call. Secondly, familiarity might also be a guideline. It might make sense for learners to cover familiar situations or topics before unfamiliar ones. For instance, it is probably easier for a learner to give a presentation on his or her own job than on something which might be less familiar or perhaps conceptually more challenging, such as business ethics or politics. Sometimes, the order is based on needs. If the course is going to take several months, it might be wise to cover areas of a higher priority first. Right? For example, receptionists might benefit from telephone training before letter writing skills because the need is perceived to be more immediate. Now finally, it is useful if the syllabus can be divided into teaching blocks which have their own aims or objectives and which can fit logically into the time available. Now with many classes, often the best way to identify what should be included on a course is for the teacher to sit down with the learners and negotiate the syllabus. This has the major advantage that the learners are usually much more motivated because they help design what is to be done. Here are 3 activities for negotiating the syllabus on day 1 of a course. First, what the group wants. So the teacher gives the learners this following sheet. So they fill in the first 2 questions on their own and then pass the sheets around so that everyone can see what their colleagues want and do not want and can understand that different people want different things. So the sheets are then used as a basis for the 3rd question. Getting them to sign at the bottom of the page is a useful way to remind them that they are part of the success of the course. Secondly, we have negotiating properties. This time, the aim is to guide learners towards a possible syllabus by suggesting possible options. Teachers might allow learners to develop their own tasks and activities. Such an approach emphasizes the need for consensus and compromise, which are such important elements in a group work. And lastly, we have refining objectives. This is a much more focused 3rd option based on a needs analysis for a corporate department. And lastly, we have managing the logistics. Course design is not only about deciding what to include in the syllabus. There are many practical considerations which can influence what happens. One decision which needs to be made is whether the teaching is to be intensive or extensive. Intensive training can be anything from a few hours a day for a few weeks to 10 days in hotel working all day. Intensive training is often used where time is short and where there are specific performance objectives to achieve. It tends to be much more focused than extensive training and is often more efficient in its use of time. For many learners, intensive training leads to noticeable improvement. Extensive training normally refers to regular but short sessions such as 2 90-minute sessions per week. This is typically of some in-company training, but also for pre-experienced groups such as business studies students who are doing English as just one part of a course of study. The advantage is that such classes cater for those learners who cannot find time to take an intensive course. The disadvantage is that attendance and motivation can be a problem. Now, a 3rd variation is to have part or all of the course delivered at a distance. This mixture of face-to-face and distance learning is sometimes known as blended learning, particularly where one of the media used is electronic. Now, other factors which may need to be coordinated before the course starts include the following. First, the training room. This is the place where teacher and learners are going to spend most of their time, so it is important that it is optimally arranged. The teacher should allow plenty of time to check the layout beforehand and will also need to set up and test any equipment which is to be used. Other issues to think about include ventilation, heating, sunlight, and noise. Secondly, the venue. Although the training room is key, it is not the only place where teachers and learners will spend their time. The teacher should therefore make sure that appropriate care is taken with planning for free time. It is also worth checking up on internet availability and photocopying facilities. Finally, the teacher should not forget to find out who the key members of the hotel staff are and where they will be in case of problems. And lastly, the contingency plans. Teachers should ask themselves what happens if and be prepared to deal with the situation accordingly. Possible problems include interruptions, distractions, materials or guest speakers that fail to arrive, and venue problems. Indeed, flexibility, patience, and inventiveness may be called for. Thank you so much for listening. That will be all for my part. I hope you have understand everything I have discussed here.